had the chronovisor array that initially was at the General Manufacturing Company facility in Convent Station, New Jersey, but was then moved to an historical building that was undergoing renovation in downtown Morristown, New Jersey. And so initially there in the summer of 70, all we were involved in was teleportation. We were being bussed up to Curtis Wright, and we'd been trained on how to jump through the device, and we were jumping through the device to get to Santa Fe, and then we were doing things there, and then we were jumping through the device at Sandia to get back to Curtis Wright. Now, what teleportation felt like was, it was very strange. You would jump through through the teleport like you were jumping through a window, but you would feel, as I said, like you were moving and not moving at the same time. You felt like you were moving forward, but also falling forward, falling downward. And it seemed to last both a long time in terms of this time dilation that occurred in the tunnel, but then we realized it was only a short time that we were in the tunnel, because, and as I later verified in discussions with my late father in the late 80s before he died in 1990, we were surviving on the air that we had pushed into the Vortal tunnel with our bodies. In fact, my dad said that the first three guys who teleported after they discovered what the device did accidentally, with the guy who fell to Africa, the tunnel they opened up was so big that the guys actually asphyxiated and died as a result of not pushing enough air into the tunnel with them. So we were apparently surviving on the bubble of oxygen, the bubble of air around our face and chest that we pushed into the tunnel just as little kids jumping through into the energy field. And I guess because of the magnetic effect inside the tunnel, the air was staying around us in a bubble.
And what was the crystal helmet used for?
The crystal helmet that I was given to go to Mars in 1981, I only wore once that I can remember when I was on Project Pegasus. And that was, I was going to describe for you what the chronovisors were like, but I did wear one crystal helmet when we jumped, well, we didn't jump. We had a chronovisor probe to 2013 at ITT Defense Communications on November 5th of 1971. So when we were jumping through the shop floor model there, the teleporter at Curtis Wright, to get to New Mexico, and then jumping through the device at the Sandia National Lab to get back to Woodridge, New Jersey, we had no specialized equipment on. All we had to do is when we were at the teleport location at Curtis Wright, we had to remove our belts because metal couldn't be taken through the tunnel. It was dangerous. It would start sparking and stuff. In fact, one time a kid, actually it was David, went through the tunnel with a quarter or a nickel in his pocket, and it actually began vibrating and got hot and shot through his pocket and burned along his pocket, split the right side of his pants open and burned out of the pocket. And then when we hit the tarmac at Curtis Wright, that thing just hit the ground and just went off like a bullet. So both of us, either of us could have actually been killed by that coin that he had left in his pocket. So I was always embarrassed when we were in New Mexico, even when I initially started going there with my father before I was officially in Project Pegasus as a child team member and being trained with other kids, because I always had to put on this stupid Cub Scout type cloth buckle with a plastic clasp. So I always felt silly because it was sort of like a Boy Scout or Cub Scout multicolored belt made out of cloth with this stupid plastic clasp on the front. And I would leave my belt there, and then when we returned, we would walk in the building and grab our belts and stuff. So we had to get rid of all the metal on our person that was magnetic. Of course, our zippers didn't matter because zippers are made of a non-metallic alloy to avoid men, for example, being struck in that part of their body by a discharge of electricity, which could cause them to potentially lose or injure their genitalia. So in fact, zippers are not magnetic. That question comes up sometime during my lectures. What about your zippers? And I say, our zippers didn't matter because they were not conductive. They were not magnetic. But anything metal had to be removed. So for example, none of the children I remember being on the project had eyeglasses, and I certainly didn't have eyeglasses at the time. I had superb uncorrected vision. So that's one thing I remember, is that none of the child participants in Pegasus wore glasses, and none of the kids in school with glasses were in Pegasus. Okay, so that must have been because glasses have metal in them inevitably, and those kids' glasses would have become supercharged and hot, and either burned their faces or went flying when they finally arrived at their destination.
Why children?
Huh?
Why children? Why would they have the children teleport?
That's what I was going to get to. So I've given you sort of the basic thrust of the program. It was an intelligence gathering program that was going to be based on physically teleporting people through Tesla-based teleportation to past or future events, or just dropping them in as spies in real time in foreign locations, and also chronovision to derive information from the quantum hologram itself about past and future events. And the chronovisors would be used both by looking at the hologram and also standing inside the hologram. So why were children used? Well, there were four reasons given to me when I was on the project, and the fifth was provided by my dad later in life, again, when I had discussions with him in the 1980s. The first reason we were told is that we were experimentees. As my dad later said in the mid-70s, DARPA wanted to test the response of you children to those technologies. And as was clear to us every time when we began teleporting to Santa Fe from Curtiss-Wright, beginning in the summer of 1970, that first summer school session we began teleporting as a group. We would arrive in the Santa Fe State Capitol complex, and roll would be taken by a young, recent college graduate named Bill Richardson, who would go on to become governor of New Mexico and energy secretary for President Clinton, a congressman from the 3rd District, and have quite a distinguished career in public service. But the first thing that Bill Richardson did in public service was greet us when we began teleporting to Santa Fe in summer of 70. Jack Pruitt, who was one of the team leaders, would gather us together after we all arrived and march us into one of the buildings there in Santa Fe, in the Santa Fe State Capitol complex, and we would stand in line in front of a door and walk one at a time in a room and sit down on one of those little chairs with a desk thing on it, and a young Bill Richardson would ask us our name first and last and have us spell and pronounce our last name. And so that was the context in which I first met Bill Richardson. But in any case, when we first began teleporting there in summer of 70, we would then be gathered up. They would do the head count. Bill Richardson would individually confirm that we were all there. And we would then be bused to an old school site in Lamy, New Mexico, which is outside of Santa Fe. And there we would be medically examined by a nurse, blood pressure, heartbeat, respiration, temperature. And we would then sit down at these long tables and take about 2 hours of standardized testing. And then we would be fed a sack lunch. And my dad later revealed to me in the late 1980s that I only missed one of those questions in all those batteries of tests that we undertook during multiple teleportations to Santa Fe during the summer of 70. And I said, yeah, I was quite proud. In fact, I was bragging about it on the project. I would always say, Andy only missed one question. He said, I think it was a math problem. He said it was one of the more difficult math problems. You didn't carry the number correctly or whatever. So anyway, we would then be cognitively tested. So the first reason they were using children, indeed very young children. I mean, I look at a 7 or an 8-year-old today and I go, my God, that's how small I was when I was in Pegasus. They were really putting me through very frightening experiences as a young child. I look at a 6-year-old. A lot of 6-year-olds today are really acting like, big babies, for lack of a better term. And I think, was I really that young and small and vulnerable when I first teleported with Dad to Santa Fe? But I have to, look back, and that's in fact how old I was. So the first reason that they're working with children is because we were experimentees. They wanted to test the effects of these different quantum access devices on our anatomy, on our physical, medical functioning.
They saw you as expendable then.
Well, we weren't exactly expendable because they had tested the teleportation with Navy enlisted. They had lost 3 guys, and then they had figured out that the vortal tunnel that was propagated had to be short enough for people to respirate with the air that they pushed into the tunnel. Then my dad said that I wasn't the first human child to teleport. I was more like the first American child to teleport, because in the second wave of testing that involved civilians, the U.S. Defense Department, you may have read about this from other sources,